Something strange is happening in the crypto world right now, and most people are missing it. For years, XRP has been surrounded by noise, price swings, criticism, endless debates. Some called it outdated. Others said it would never reach its full potential. But what if all of that chaos was just a distraction? Because today, the pieces are finally starting to click into place. And when you zoom out for just a second, what you see is not random, it's not luck, it's not hype, it's a setup that has been quietly building for years. And now suddenly everything is aligning at the same time. Let me ask you something. What if the biggest shift in crypto isn't coming from hype coins or trending narratives, but from something that has been right in front of us this entire time? What if XRP was never falling behind, but actually waiting for the perfect moment? Because right now that moment might finally be here. We've all seen the volatility, the sudden drops, the fear spreading across social media, the constant wave of doubt trying to shake people out. It's loud, it's emotional, and honestly, it's exhausting. But here's the thing most people don't realize. The real game is not played in the noise, it's played in the fundamentals. And today, something big just happened that connects multiple dots at once: policy, adoption, and technology, all pointing in one direction: forward. Now, before we go deeper, quick reminder, this is not financial advice. Always do your own research and make decisions based on your own understanding. But with that said, let's talk about what just dropped, because this is where things start getting really interesting. Ripple has just announced a major strategic partnership, and it's not small. This isn't another maybe someday project. This is real. This is active. This is happening now. They've partnered with Convera, the company that evolved from what used to be Western Union's business solutions arm. And if you don't know how big that is, let's break it down simply. Convera operates in over 200 countries. They support more than 140 currencies, and they process payments for thousands of businesses across the globe. We're not talking about a startup experimenting with crypto. We're talking about a global payments powerhouse. Now, here's where it gets powerful. This partnership is focused on stablecoin-powered cross-border payments, but not in a complicated technical way. Think of it like this: money goes in as traditional currency. It gets converted into a stablecoin like RLUSD on the back end. It moves instantly across borders using blockchain, and then it comes out the other side as local currency again. Fast, smooth, efficient, no delays, no middlemen dragging things down. This is what some people call the stablecoin sandwich. And while the name might sound simple, the impact is massive. Because for decades, global payments have been slow, expensive, and inefficient. Businesses lose time, they lose money, and they deal with constant friction. But this system, it removes most of those problems completely. And here's the part that should really make you pause. This is not a test. This is not a small pilot program. This is a full strategic rollout, meaning it's designed to scale. Now think about that for a second. A global payments company working with Ripple, using blockchain technology to improve real-world financial operations at scale. That's not hype, that's utility, but it gets even deeper, because if you've been in the XRP space for a while, you might remember something. Years ago, there were rumors, talk, and speculation about Ripple working with Western Union. Back then, critics laughed. They said it was just hype, just wishful thinking, nothing real. But today, we're seeing those early connections evolve into something real, something tangible, something powerful. And that tells us something very important. In crypto, timing is everything. Sometimes what looks like nothing is actually groundwork. Sometimes what looks like silence is actually preparation. And sometimes what looks like delay is actually strategy, because building relationships with institutions doesn't happen overnight. It takes years. Trust has to be built. Systems have to be tested. Regulations have to be clear. And now, we're finally seeing what happens when all of that effort starts paying off. This is what separates short-term hype from long-term vision. Anyone can launch a token, anyone can create excitement, but very few projects can build real-world infrastructure that businesses actually use. And that's where XRP starts to stand out, because this isn't just about price, it's about purpose. It's about solving problems that exist in the real financial world. Now here's where things start connecting even more, Because this partnership didn't happen in isolation, it didn't just appear out of nowhere, it's happening at a very specific time, a time when the entire regulatory environment is shifting, a time when governments, especially in the US, are starting to take crypto seriously. And this changes everything, because for years, one of the biggest barriers to adoption was uncertainty. Companies didn't know what the rules would be. Banks were hesitant. Institutions stayed on the sidelines. But now that hesitation is fading. And when fear disappears, action begins. So what we're seeing right now is not just a partnership, it's a signal that the environment is finally ready, a signal that institutions are stepping in, a signal that the groundwork is turning into real movement. And if you're paying attention, this might just be the beginning. But here's the question you should be asking yourself right now. If this is what's happening on the surface, what's happening behind the scenes, what other pieces are quietly falling into place, and more importantly, how big could this actually get? Because in the next part, we're going to connect this partnership to something even bigger: government policy, institutional money, and the shift that could push XRP into an entirely new phase. Now, here's where things go from interesting to undeniable, because that partnership we just talked about, it didn't happen randomly. It landed at the exact same time something much bigger is unfolding in the background. A massive shift in government attitude toward crypto. For years, crypto in the United States felt like it was stuck in limbo, unclear rules, confusing regulations, constant fear of crackdowns. It created hesitation, not just for retail investors, but for banks, institutions, and major companies. Everyone was waiting for clarity, waiting for a signal, waiting for permission to move forward, and now that signal might finally be here. Over the past year, we've seen something that would have been almost impossible to imagine just a few years ago: a pro-crypto stance coming directly from the highest levels of government, and this changes everything. Think about it like this: when governments fight innovation, progress slows down, but when governments support innovation, it accelerates fast. We've already seen signs of this shift. Policies that once restricted crypto are now being reworked, new frameworks are being discussed, and more importantly, crypto is no longer being treated like a threat. It's being treated like an opportunity, and XRP is right in the middle of it. Back in 2025, one of the biggest signals came when digital assets started being considered for strategic reserves. Yes, reserves, the same way countries hold gold or other key assets. Crypto, including XRP, was suddenly being viewed as something valuable at a national level. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't just retail speculation anymore. This is governments thinking long term. And when that happens, institutions pay attention, because institutions don't move based on hype. They move based on safety, clarity, and long-term potential. Now add another layer to this: banks. For a long time, banks stayed away from crypto, not because they didn't see the potential, but because they didn't want regulatory risk. But now, that wall is starting to break. New guidelines are opening the door for banks to actually hold and manage digital assets. And that's a huge deal, because once banks step in, liquidity follows. And where does that liquidity go? It doesn't chase hype. It flows into assets with real use cases, real infrastructure, real-world application. This is where XRP gains a massive advantage. Because while many crypto projects are still trying to prove their value, XRP has been focused on one thing from the beginning: solving real financial problems, cross-border payments, liquidity management, settlement speed, cost efficiency. These are not small issues. These are trillion-dollar problems, and now suddenly the environment is ready for solutions. So when you see a partnership like Ripple and Convera happening right now, you have to ask yourself, would this have been possible a few years ago? Probably not, because the conditions weren't right. The regulatory clarity wasn't there. The confidence wasn't there. But today, everything is different. And here's where it gets even more interesting: timing. Because this partnership didn't just happen during a regulatory shift. It happened during a wave of pro-crypto momentum. We're seeing discussions about retirement funds gaining exposure to crypto. We're seeing institutions exploring custody solutions. We're seeing financial giants slowly stepping into the space, and all of this creates something powerful: confidence. Confidence is what drives adoption. Adoption is what drives usage. and usage is what drives long-term value. This is the cycle most people miss. They focus only on price, but price is the result, not the cause. The cause is everything happening behind the scenes, the partnerships, the policies, the infrastructure. And right now, all three are aligning. This is what people mean when they say the dots are connecting, because think about it. You have government support increasing institutional barriers being removed, real-world partnerships scaling globally. That's not coincidence, that's momentum, and momentum is dangerous in a good way, because once it starts building, it's very hard to stop. Now, here's something most people don't talk about. Psychology. Markets are driven by emotion, fear, doubt, excitement, greed. For years, the XRP community has dealt with uncertainty, legal battles, criticism, constant FUD, and what does that do? It shakes out weak hands, but at the same time, it strengthens the conviction of those who understand the bigger picture, because when clarity finally arrives, those who stayed informed are already positioned. And this is exactly the kind of moment where that matters. We're seeing a transition from fear to forward movement, from doubt to development, from speculation to real adoption. And XRP is sitting right at the center of that transition. But here's the real question. Is this just a temporary phase, or is this the beginning of something much bigger? Because in the next part, we're going to go deeper into the technology itself. We're going to talk about what actually makes XRP different, why its design matters, and how something unexpected, something most people aren't even thinking about yet, could give XRP a massive edge in the future. I'm talking about security, I'm talking about resilience, and yes, I'm talking about the quantum threat that could change everything. And when you see how XRP fits into that picture, you might start looking at this entire space very differently. Let's talk about something most people are not paying attention to yet, but they will, sooner than they expect. Because while everyone is focused on price charts, market cycles, and short-term gains, there's a bigger conversation quietly building in the background. A conversation about security, a conversation about the future of blockchain technology, and more importantly, a conversation about a threat that could reshape the entire crypto space. That threat, quantum computing. Now, don't worry, we're going to keep this simple. No complicated tech talk. Just the core idea you need to understand. Right now, most cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, rely on something called cryptography to stay secure. This is what protects wallets. This is what keeps your funds safe. This is what makes blockchain trustworthy. But here's the problem. Quantum computers, once they reach a certain level, could potentially break that cryptography. Let that sink in. We're talking about a future where powerful machines could unlock private keys, access wallets, and potentially create chaos across networks that are not prepared. Now, is this happening tomorrow? No. But is it coming faster than people expected? Yes. Recent reports from experts are starting to raise concerns, not panic, but awareness. Because if this technology advances quickly, some networks could face serious risks. And here's where things get uncomfortable for a lot of crypto projects. They're not ready. Some blockchains don't have easy ways to upgrade their security systems. Some don't allow smooth key rotation. Some would require massive changes or even migrations to stay safe. That's not just a technical issue. That's a trust issue. Because if users feel their assets are at risk, what happens? They move. Now here's where XRP enters the conversation in a big way. Because while many networks are just starting to think about this problem, the XRP Ledger has already been exploring solutions quietly, consistently, without hype. It supports something very important, key rotation. In simple terms, that means users can update their security keys without losing access to their assets, without moving funds, without creating chaos. That's a huge advantage. On top of that, there have been ongoing discussions and experiments around post-quantum security within the XRP ecosystem, meaning they're not just reacting to the future, they're preparing for it. And this changes the conversation completely, because now XRP is not just about fast payments, it's not just about low fees, it's not just about partnerships, it's about resilience. The ability to survive and thrive in a future where technology evolves rapidly. Think about it like this. In the early days of the internet, security wasn't a big focus. Speed and access were the priorities, but over time, security became everything. The same thing is happening in crypto. At first, it was all about decentralization and innovation. Now, it's about trust, safety, and long-term stability. And the projects that can offer that, they win. So when you connect this back to everything we've already talked about, it starts to form a very clear picture. You have real-world adoption through partnerships, government support, creating a safe environment. And now, technological resilience for the future. That's a powerful combination. And here's the part most people still don't see. These factors don't just exist separately, they reinforce each other. Stronger security builds trust. Trust attracts institutions. Institutions bring liquidity. Liquidity drives usage. And usage builds long-term value. It's a cycle. And XRP is positioning itself right in the middle of it. Now imagine a scenario a few years from now, quantum technology becomes more advanced. Security concerns start making headlines. Users begin questioning which networks are safe, where do they go? They go to systems that are prepared, systems that can adapt, systems that won't break under pressure. And that's where XRP could stand out in a major way, not because it's the loudest, not because it's the most hyped, but because it's built with the future in mind. And this is what separates short-term excitement from long-term survival, because in the end, the crypto space won't just reward innovation, it will reward durability. Now let's take this one step further. Combine this technological edge with the regulatory support we talked about earlier and the growing list of real-world partnerships. What do? You get something very rare in crypto. Alignment between government, technology, and enterprise. And when that happens, things move fast, faster than most people expect, because once institutions feel safe, once technology proves reliable, once use cases become clear, adoption doesn't trickle in, it accelerates, and that's the phase we might be entering right now. But here's the final piece of the puzzle, the part that ties everything together, because even with all of this progress, there's still one thing standing in the way: perception, years of doubt, years of criticism, years of misinformation. And in the final part, we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the FUD, the skepticism, the narratives that have held XRP back, and more importantly, why those narratives might be collapsing right in front of us, because once perception changes, everything changes.